Hey everyone, it's Lids, and we're back for some more Gwent, and today we'll be doing an in-depth analysis of all the 24 new cards from the latest Gwent Claw and Dagger expansion, which releases on April 13th. Every faction except neutrals is getting a new card from each rarity. We'll discuss each of the new cards' abilities, how to use them effectively, how they can combine with one another, and highlight synergies with both existing cards and leader abilities. Now let's dive in. For Northern Realms, the new Claw and Dagger cards build upon a solid archetype that I've enjoyed playing for a while: deck boosting. First, there's Redanian Agent, which is a common 4-power, 4-provision human agent unit with Veil. It has an order to boost a unit in your deck by 1 with a cooldown of 2, so you can use it every other turn. Basically, this is a mini Dandelion, which was a popular card to use in deck boosting decks. To have a cheap bronze card that you can have or create multiple copies of serve a similar purpose should make deck boosting decks more powerful and more consistent. That means you can definitely put even more boosts on your best deck boost target, but may even have enough deck boosting to occasionally power up other units that you wouldn't normally target just to proactively get them out of removal range. Next, there's Sigismund Dijkstra, a legendary 4-power, 12-provision human agent aristocrat unit. While Siggy is in your deck, any boosts on Siggy get doubled. When he's on the board, you can use his order to play a boosted unit from your deck. That means Siggy serves 2 purposes. While he's in your deck, he is now the most efficient short-term target for your deck boosts, Archgriffin being the best long-term option. That's decent, but not enough to warrant his high provision cost. Once he's on the board, he can play any boosted unit from your deck. Because most Northern Realms deck boosting decks can fairly easily boost multiple units, you'll likely have decent flexibility when choosing your target. That makes Siggy, at worst, a tutor for one specific card with a 4-point body, but at best, a big point slam that can also either give you your next best card for your deck, or a specific tech unit to fit the situation, giving Siggy huge upside. The new Northern Realms epic card is Drakenborg, a 9-provision location artifact. When you play it, you choose a boosted unit to summon from your deck, lock that card, and remove its boost. Then, with Drakenborg's order ability, you can reapply the boost that you took from the unit that you summoned to one of your units on the board. Of the new Northern Realms cards, this one is definitely the most nuanced. Firstly, it's a tutor to get Siggy or one of your other deck boosting targets on the board. However, because Drakenborg, temporarily, removes the boost and locks the card that you summoned, the short-term value is bad. However, having the flexibility to reapply or redirect that boost when and where you want will give advanced players the ability to dodge some would-be counters. Remember, Siggy is the most efficient card to receive deck boosts in the short term because he doubles those boosts. But Archgriffin is a better boost recipient long term because it can carry over those boosts into subsequent rounds. Drakenborg gives you a way to target Siggy with your deck boosting in round 1 for more tempo, one of this archetype's weaknesses, then transfer those boosts to Archgriffin at the end of the round for carryover. Similarly, because Drakenborg has resilience, if your opponent bleeds you into playing it earlier than you wanted to, you can save the order ability for the next round and still get the carryover that you wanted to get from transferring the boost onto Archgriffin. Drakenborg is definitely the most difficult of the new cards to master for Northern Realms, and that may make some players reluctant to use it at first, but with practice, skilled players will probably opt to use it in any deck with Siggy, especially when combined with the next card. Lastly, there's Redanian Secret Service, a rare 1-power, 6-provision human agent unit. If you don't already have a copy of it on the board, when one of your units gets a status, Redanian Secret Service gets summoned from your deck. It then has a Zeal order to purify an allied unit. The obvious use for this card is to immediately purify whatever card you summon with Drakenborg, because Drakenborg will lock that unit, which will likely summon a Redanian Secret Service from your deck. That means that you can more reliably use Drakenborg into Siggy into the Archgriffin combo. However, Redanian Secret Service is by far the most versatile of the new Northern Realms cards, so it doesn't need to be combined with Drakenborg to be useful. Redanian Secret Service will get summoned the first time in the round that your opponent locks, or poisons, or infuses one of your units, giving you access to purification right when you really need it. Previously, Northern Realms had arguably the worst faction-specific purification card, Kud Kudak, so having a unit thin from your deck to purify while maintaining devotion could make it worth throwing Redanian Secret Service into other decks as a tech card as well. So to sum up how the new Northern Realms cards work together, Redanian Agent will give boosts to Siggy while he's in your deck. You'll do that for several turns, then you'll use Drakenborg to summon Siggy from your deck. Because Drakenborg gives Siggy a status, the Redanian Secret Service will likely also get summoned from your deck. You'll then use Redanian Secret Service's order to unlock Siggy, and use Siggy to play another one of your boosted cards from your deck, likely an Archgriffin or Erland. Other existing cards to consider combining with the new Northern Realms Claw and Dagger set could be Dandelion for more deck boosts, and Archgriffin as a deck boost recipient, and Siggy/Drakenborg target, as previously discussed. If you do include Archgriffin, you could also use Visigoda to give Archgriffin even more boosts while he's on the board. In that case, you could consider proactively boosting Visigoda while he's in your deck to keep him out of removal range. Additionally, Erland used to be one of the primary deck boosters and finishers in these types of decks. There's also All God and Offering for more deck boosting, though using those would break Devotion. That may be relevant because Varaxis, who benefits from Devotion, could reset Siggy's order, letting you play another boosted unit from your deck. If you're using Erland, then you may also want to consider using King Foltest, as he adds more units to your deck for Erland to boost. A Devotion Foltest deck will immediately boost the units that it adds to your deck, which also gives you more flexibility with Siggy. If you create extra copies of Blue Stripes Commando or Dunbanner, then having the option for Siggy to summon one of those also gives you an alternate win condition. Then there's Mutagenerator, which can give you a lot more deck boosts, but may require careful deck building to maximize deck boosts by loading up on as many units as you can get that cost the same number of provisions. Lastly, any deck that highly boosts units can potentially benefit from the extra safety of a defender, so Donamir wouldn't be a bad addition either. Those cards are too expensive to fit into the same deck, but choosing a subset of them that fits the aspect you want to focus on could give you a decisive advantage over your opponent. Now finally, for which leader abilities to use with the new Northern Realms cards. NR deck boosting usually invests so heavily in one or two units that it previously relied heavily on pincer maneuver to make sure that it got those cards. But with Drakenborg and Siggy both being tutors, that could make pincer maneuver decks less susceptible to getting those leader ability charges bled out early, which was previously one of the biggest weaknesses for Erland Archgriffin decks. Then, in the best case scenario, it may leave players with more leader ability charges to spare, giving them more flexibility to get other valuable cards with their leader ability. Or for the bold, Drakenborg and Siggy could give players enough tutors to use a different leader ability altogether to support other cards. Redanian Agent and Dandelion both benefit from Stockpile, but that's probably still not a big enough reason to use that ability, unless other cooldown cards, which generally don't synergize well with this archetype, or Stockpile itself, get buffed. Inspired Zeal is a useful all-purpose leader ability for other Northern Realms cards in your deck, but doesn't make a big difference for most of the cards in this archetype other than Siggy, unless you're also going to squeeze in Reavers. Royal Inspiration could work if you combine deck boosting cards with Knights, which are somewhat reasonable archetypes to fuse because they both focus on boosting. If you spread your deck boosts across multiple units, then Uprising may even be the top leader ability choice for this archetype. Alright, let's talk about the new Claw and Dagger Monsters cards. In this case, all of the new cards are contributing toward an archetype that was reasonably strong not that long ago, albeit a fair bit underrated: Arrakis Swarm. The new Monsters common card is the 4-power, 4-provision, 1-armor insectoid unit, the Kikimor Hatchling. Whenever you play an organic card, the Hatchling gets boosted by 1. Then once per turn, you can remove a boost from the Hatchling to spawn a drone in that row. That's obviously a net 0-point order, but it can still be very useful. Assuming that you're using the Arrakis Swarm leader ability, you're already going to have a lot of organic cards in your deck because they give you a combination of unit spawning, boosts, and control, all while giving you a free 1-point drone. Because Arrakis Swarm decks generally win rounds by flooding their board quickly with a lot of weak units, then boosting them all with cards like Bone Talisman, those decks are looking for any source of unit spawning they can get. Kikimor Hatchling functionally doubles the drones that you get from playing organic cards, or triples it if you have 2 Hatchlings on the board. That's a big deal because previously, Arrakis Swarm could get stuck in a short round if it didn't draw into its best sources of unit spawning, like Arrakis Nest and Spontaneous Evolution. No one likes having no choice but to use Bone Talisman on a near-empty board. The extra drones from the Hatchling give you more of a safety net in case you get stuck in a short round with organic cards that don't directly spawn units, like Lacerate, Parasite, or Predatory Dive. But then if you do have your organic cards that spawn units, and or you're concerned about running out of board space, you can keep the boost on the Hatchling and use it as more of a straightforward engine, giving you convenient flexibility. The new Monsters rare is the Kikimor Stalker. This is a 3-power, 5-provision insectoid unit with Veil. It has a Zeal order to either consume an allied drone or damage an enemy unit by 1. Every time you spawn 1 or more units, the Stalker gains a charge. The Predator tag means that this card can only target units that have lower power than itself. The primary purpose of the Stalker is of course to deal damage, and in most Raucous Swarm decks, you should be spawning enough units for that damage to add up quickly. Consuming an allied drone is a net 0 point play, but like Syndicate's Lonely Champion, it gives spawning decks an option to create more board space so that it can continue with more unit spawning. Because the Stalker starts at 3 power, you may need to use that consumability and or boost it with something like Spontaneous Evolution to make it strong enough to target the units that you want to destroy. Otherwise, especially against opponents that do lots of boosting, you may gain lots of charges but never be able to use them to deal damage. Functionally, that means that although the Stalker has lots of damage potential, you may often need to take a turn or two to power it up before it starts to pay off for you. If you can get multiple Stalkers on the board and make them strong enough that the Predator tag doesn't hold them back, then the damage could add up quickly enough to shut down a lot of decks. The new Monster's Epic card is Acid Spray, an 8 provision organic special card that infuses one of your opponent's units with a damaging status. Whenever you spawn a unit, the card that you infused will get damaged by 1. Then, when the infused unit gets weakened to 1 power, the next time you spawn a unit, instead of destroying the card that you infused, the infusion will spread to adjacent units. This works well with Insectoids and a Raucous Swarm because unit spawning is what they focus on doing. Acid Spray is slow, but has the potential for a lot of damage in a long round. There is some risk that your opponent avoids playing units next to the one that you infuse, so maybe you delay using Acid Spray a little to ensure that you can at least spread it a bit. But be wary that artifacts counter Acid Spray very easily and effectively. Notably, Acid Spray weakens but does not destroy the units that get infused, so you'll need something else to finish the job. Fortunately, Acid Spray is great to set up cards for Stalker to destroy. Also consider using Lacerate because it's an organic card, so it synergizes with the Raucous Swarm, and the Acid Spray infusions will be limited to 1 row, so Lacerate can potentially hit any and everyone that you infused. But the biggest synergy may be Glusty Warp, since that not only destroys 1 power cards, but gets boosted in the process. Then a sneaky synergy to consider might be to use Drowner to move an infused unit to the other row and spread the infusion in the process, since the infusion would otherwise just be limited to 1 row. Finally, the monster's legendary card is Hive Mind, a 10 provision organic special card. When you play Hive Mind, you choose 4 bronze Kikimor units. Notably, there are only 4 options, so the only thing that matters here is the order that you choose them. Then, the first time you spawn a drone on your turn, you will replace a drone with a bronze Kikimor unit in the order that you chose them. I have some mixed feelings about Hive Mind because although spawning drones is easy in a Raucous Swarm decks, it takes 4 turns to get the full value out of Hive Mind, which is fairly slow. Assuming that you're using a Raucous Swarm, the first Kikimor should spawn immediately from the drone that you create directly from Hive Mind, since Hive Mind is an organic card. Being careful with the order that you choose the bronze Kikimors might help. You can front load your points with Kikimor Worker, but all the other bronze Kikimors are engines, so you'll usually want to start with those, making Hive Mind a little dangerous if you have to play it late in a round. On the other hand, Hive Mind makes a very unique form of carryover, because you could play it in round 1, then as long as it stays in your graveyard, it could still take effect in round 2 and or 3. Assuming you do have time to get all the Kikimors from Hive Mind, it's worth at least 18 points, possibly much more, which is great value, assuming that you can manage the timing well. Given the unique way that it works and the adaptations you'd want to make to optimize it and or minimize the risk in different situations, Hive Mind will be a difficult card to master, but for those who do, it could pay off big time. In terms of how the new monsters cards work together, play Kikimor Hatchling and Stalker early to spawn more drones and gain damage when you do so. Then, play Acid Spray in a row that has at least a few units so that you know the infusion will have some opportunities to spread. Use the Stalker to destroy cards weakened by Acid Spray, and as for Hive Mind, the timing and selections vary depending on the scenario. You could play it early for more Hatchlings and Stalkers, or you could play Hive Mind late in round 1 or even deliberately not spawn many drones in the round that you play Hive Mind to save some of its value as carryover in a later round. Optimize Acid Spit and Stalker damage along with careful Hive Mind timing will be the key ways to outplay your opponents. Monster Swarm is already a well-developed archetype with lots of existing cards that can help support it. It may be a while until players settle on the perfect combination of complementary cards, but there are so many choices that there will probably still be some room for personal preference. For unit spawning, consider cards like Iteran, Eater, Spontaneous Evolution, Raucous Behemoth, Raucous Nest, Kikimor Warrior, Andrega Queen, Were-Rat, Andrega Eggs, Andrega Warrior, Natural Selection, Operator, and Night Wraith. For Consumption and Destruction, which is an adjacent archetype to help sustain board space, consider Glusty Warp, Raucous Queen, Were-Rat, Andrega Queen, Kikimor Warrior, Eater, and Andrega Warrior. For wide boosting, you could use Kikimor Queen, Yennefer of Vengerberg, Bone Talisman, Chimera, Dodalok into Chimera, Zoltan Scoundrel, and Commander's Horn. Hull boosting is also a possibility with Spontaneous Evolution or Parasite, ideally on the Stalker, or even She-Troll and Vrand Warrior. Control for Acid Spray and Stalker support could come from Glusty Warp, Scorch, Igni, Glorious Hunt, Curse of Corruption, Villain Trettenmirth, Arrakis Venom, Lacerate, Predatory Dive, Natural Selection, Parasite, Yennefer Illusionist, or even Manticore Venom, though that's probably still not worth it. For your monster's leader ability, it's going to be Arrakis Swarm 99 times out of 100 for the additional insectoid spawning when you play an organic card, and the 5 drones whenever you need them. Anything else would be extremely niche, but Overwhelming Hunger would be the most likely choice if you're emphasizing the consumption. Next, let's discuss the new Claw and Dagger Skellige cards. This set is focusing on an archetype that may not be as popular as it once was, but is still quite strong: Weather. Kelpie is the new Skellige epic card. It's a 4-power, 9-provision beast that spawns 1 turn of rain on an enemy row for every 3 beasts in your starting deck. Then, whenever an enemy unit takes damage from rain or storm, boost a random unboosted allied beast by 1. Obviously, that means when you're using Kelpie, you want to have as many beasts and weather synergies as you can get. It actually is possible to fill your entire deck with beasts, which, assuming you don't go over 25 cards, would give you 8 turns of rain. That would mean you could play Kelpie on turn 1 and have rain active for almost, if not the entire round. However, you'd probably like to delay Kelpie at least a little bit to make sure your opponent has at least a couple of units in the row that you are applying the rain so that you don't waste it. That means that, realistically, you probably don't need to have a deck of entirely beasts for Kelpie to work. That's a good thing because, although there are already some beasts like Melusine, Fukusia, Messenger of the Sea, and Little Half-Brew with rain abilities that would synergize well with Kelpie, there are also some humans with useful weather abilities as well. That way, you don't have to be too worried about throwing Fulmar, Riogon, Bride of the Sea, or Melusine Cultists into your Kelpie decks. However, Kelpie's boost ability only applies to beasts, so that's another reason to squeeze more beasts into your deck. Normally, because Kelpie can only boost unboosted beasts, you'd think that means that, at most, it can only boost each unit once. However, if one of your beasts has taken damage, then Kelpie could boost it multiple times. That may seem like a niche scenario, but it actually could factor in almost every turn if you play Kelpie in the same round as Melusine. That way, Kelpie can keep boosting Melusine and or any beasts that take damage from being next to Melusine. That, and because Kelpie boosts units every time an enemy takes damage from rain or storm, if you put rain in both rows, Kelpie could boost 4 points per turn, and if you have storm in one or both rows, then Kelpie could boost even more. For all those reasons, I think Kelpie is going to be a really strong card. The new Skellige rare card is Sea Serpent. This is a 1-power, 5-provision beast that damages an enemy unit by 3 when you play it. It also boosts itself by 1 on deploy for each turn that you triggered rain or storm on your opponent in the current round. Sea Serpent is a finisher because the value of its boost increases while it's still in your hand or deck, but not when it's already on the board. That means if you play it early in the round or in a round when you've used little to no rain, it would be about 4 points for 5 provisions, which is bad. However, if you're using rain on every turn and finish with Sea Serpent, it could be worth 13 or 14 points for 5 provisions, which is fantastic. Nowadays, seemingly everyone tries to win matches 2-0 rather than dry passing, which means shorter rounds. That could make Sea Serpent risky to have in your hand in round 2 if you lost round 1 and your opponent starts bleeding you in round 2, but on the other hand, if you won round 1, then Sea Serpent encourages you to dry pass in round 2 to maximize the length of round 3, giving you more Sea Serpent boost potential. Personally, I think that Gwent is devolving a bit into a 2-round game, and that's a big problem because it discourages players from making more nuanced plays that take longer to set up in favor of simplistic, unengaging point slams. Sea Serpent may not single-handedly right the ship by encouraging players to use more ambitious cards that require development, but hopefully it helps to partially rectify that situation. Anglerfish is the new Skellige common card. It's a 3-power, 5-provision beast that gets summoned from your deck to the range row at the end of your turn if your opponent has rain or storm in both of their rows. Then, if neither of your opponent's rows has rain or storm at the end of your turn, Anglerfish will go back into your deck. Firstly, let's highlight that although you need rain or storm in both rows to get the Anglerfish out from your deck, you only need to keep rain or storm in one row to keep Anglerfish on the board. So although you need a lot of weather to summon Anglerfish, you don't need as much to keep it on the board. That risk of having it returned to your deck is very unusual. Only the recently reworked Highwayman has an ability like that. But assuming that you're using Anglerfish in a dedicated rain deck, it should be fairly easy to sustain those weather effects. Even if you can't, at least Anglerfish goes back to the bottom of your deck, so there's little to no risk of drawing into it, meaning that you can still have a chance to summon it back out in a later round. Assuming that you can sustain the weather effects, Anglerfish is one of the few Skellige cards that can get summoned from your deck rather than your graveyard. That gives Skellige weather decks access to better thinning and thus consistency without having to rely on forcing the discard package of Coral, Burna, Scald, Skirmishers, and/or Morkvarg into practically every deck. That, and getting 2 Anglerfish summoned onto the board in one turn to get 6 points from your deck is great. Add that to Lippy decks if you can still get enough rain to support them. Lippy decks don't tend to have much, if any, rain. Then it could add 6 points to Lippy's deck flip, giving those decks even more late-game tempo. Then for the extremely ambitious, maybe there's a way to make the Anglerfish the recipient of the damage from some of your self-damage cards, then deliberately let it go back into your deck before it gets destroyed to get the benefits of whatever self-damage cards you're using, while still keeping the Anglerfish in your deck to summon it back out later for the full value. That seems way too clunky to be useful, but maybe it happens every once in a while with a card like Melusine. Last, but certainly not least, the new Skellige legendary card is the Kraken. It's a 6-power, 13-provision disloyal beast, so you'll play it on your opponent's side of the board. When you play it, it spawns Storm for 3 turns in that same row. Then if you destroy the Kraken, it will come back to your side of the board and get boosted by the number of unique beasts that you control. Kraken now becomes the 2nd strongest disloyal unit after Rainfarn, and the 1st disloyal Skellige card. Its high power makes it a bit risky because if you don't get good value from its ability, then you're just handing your opponent a fair bit of points. Fortunately, its ability is super strong. It creates Storm, which is significantly stronger than Rain, and becomes one of the best sources of Storm in the entire game, second only to a well-developed Fulmar. You'll want to play Kraken on a crowded row to take full advantage of that Storm, so you'll probably want to wait a few turns to play it to determine when and where you can maximize its value. However, make sure that you still give yourself enough time for the Storm damage to proc, and enough time to destroy the Kraken to trigger its Death Wish ability. From a damage standpoint, it would cap out at about 24 damage, though it's likely to be much less than that. Then, of course, it's minus 6 points if you don't destroy it, but if you do, it could be as high as about 15 when it comes back to your side of the board and gets boosted, but would likely be closer to about 10 depending on how many different beasts you have loaded into your deck. That means that the range on the Kraken is huge, anywhere from -6 to +39. It's unlikely you'll get anywhere near those extremes, but the deciding factor of whether it's worth that high 13 provision cost will likely be whether you manage to kill it or not. All that Storm would make for a great Messenger of the Sea setup. As for some more unusual synergies, I'm not really sure you'd want to do this because you'd miss out on the Kraken's strong deployability, but you could use it as a Sove target to boost Sove and get the Kraken back on your side of the board when you destroy it. When you're playing the new Skellige cards together, you'll want Kelpie early to set the rain in one of your opponent's rows. Then, when your opponent inevitably avoids playing anything else in that row, play the Kraken in that other row, which will summon the Anglerfish from your deck. Then, finish with Sea Serpent for a little damage and a big point slam. Fortunately, you won't need to rely exclusively on the new Claw and Dagger cards to set each other up, because Skellige Weather was already a solid archetype with many very powerful cards. Fukusia, Melusine, Fulmar, Melusine Cultist, and Little Halfru are all great ways to give you more weather. Messenger of the Sea could become even stronger with all the additional weather support. Corrupted Flaminica can get a big boost from the many beasts you'll have in your graveyard, and Seagull is a great 4-provision beast filler card. Some more questionable combos could be Bride of the Sea to replay an alchemy card, though I don't think you'll have as many alchemy cards as rain decks used to use. Sove can combine with Kraken, though they do work together, they will reduce each other's value a little bit. Svalbard gives you more beasts and self-damage, Lippy can give you extra Anglerfish value, and even Shoop, because Kraken wants unique beasts, so you could remove all duplicates, though losing an extra Anglerfish would be unfortunate. Ryogon may seem like a good choice, but he technically has some anti-synergies with Sea Serpent and Anglerfish, though he may still be worth it to trigger extra turns of weather at the end of the round. And of course, you could potentially justify almost any other beast for Kelpie and Kraken synergies. For Skellige leader abilities, Rage of the Sea is the obvious choice, but there may be some niche cases for Patricidal Fury with Sove, or Ursine Ritual with either Svalbard or Lippy. Now let's talk Syndicate. In this case, the new Claw and Dagger cards are based on one of the most underrepresented Witcher 3 missions, the Hearts of Stone Heist. The cards provide new ways to spend and sustain coins focusing especially on interactions when you run out of coins. The new cards could fit into any of a number of archetypes, giving players lots of options. Let's dive into the specifics. Let's start with the new Syndicate legendary card, Casimir Bossi. He's a 6 power, 11 Parisian dwarf crown splitter with Veil. When you play him, he'll spend all of your coins and get boosted by 1 for every coin you spend. Then, the first time you use all of your coins each turn, he'll spawn the new Explosives card in the same row. Explosives is a doomed token artifact that turns 2 coins into 2 damage, then destroys itself. However, if you don't use its fee ability, on your next turn, the damage remains 2, but the cost goes down to 1 coin. Then if you don't use the 1 coin fee, Explosives will destroy itself. Casimir can be a point slam and or a 2 point per turn damage engine. To maximize his value, you'll want to already have at least 1 coin when you play him to get him boosted. Doing so will drop you to 0 coins, so unless you were coinless when you played him, he should immediately spawn a copy of Explosives. However, staying on 0 coins indefinitely will not spawn any more Explosives. You will only get more on subsequent turns when you spend coins to drop back down to 0. That means that to optimize Casimir, you want both coin generation and coin spending every turn. Fortunately, the Explosives can serve as a coin spender, though be careful that your coin generation lines up well with the amount of coins that you want to spend. The Explosives get cheaper if you don't use them immediately, which at 2 points per coin is great value. However, because you're limited to spawning 1 Explosives per turn, and they self-destruct if you don't use their 1 coin fee, you will never have more than 2 Explosives at once, and the most you can spend on them in a single turn is 3 coins. So if you're generating more than 3 coins per turn, make sure that you have another spender. On the other end of the spectrum, make sure that you have enough coins to use the Explosives, otherwise they'll disappear. Also, be careful about the increment of coins that you generate and spend, because it's fairly common to get stuck with 1 coin at the end of your turn and no way to spend it if all of your spenders have fee 2 abilities. That means that it's going to take a lot of math to optimize Casimir, and the way that you crunch your numbers will likely change from one turn to the next, potentially requiring significant planning and foresight. For that reason, it will be very difficult to play Casimir perfectly, but for those who do, he will be very powerful. Look to combine him with slow and steady coin earners and spenders like Tax Collector and Coerced Blacksmith. For the ambitious, Treasure Huntress and In Search of Forgotten Treasures would have incredible upside. The new Syndicate epic card is Eveline Gallo, a 5 power, 7 provision elf. If you don't have any coins at the end of your turn, she will give you 3 coins. Similarly to Casimir, Eveline rewards players for spending all of their coins every turn. The 2 cards synergize well, as Eveline alone can give you enough coins to use all of your Explosives in any given turn, but you may need more coin generation if you have additional coin spenders. Eveline's ability is very similar to Chapter 1 of In Search of Forgotten Treasures, which also automatically restores coins if you finish your turn with a certain number of them. In fact, by reducing the automatic coin restoration threshold on the scenario with Hidden Cache and 2 rounds of Flinder's Crew, you can spend every coin every turn, get 3 coins back from Eveline, and then have In Search of Forgotten Treasures get you back up to 9 coins. That may be tricky to set up, but it gives you a minimum of 9 coins to spend every turn, which is incredible. If you get Bincy and or Townsfolk in there, then that would be nearly unstoppable. Alternatively, you could use Eveline in just about any Syndicate deck as a higher risk, higher reward, and cheaper version of Imke. The new Syndicate rare card is Open Sesame, a 5 Parisian crime. It gives you 5 coins immediately when you play it. Then, while in your graveyard, it will gain a counter every time you drop to 0 coins. Once the counter reaches 6, you gain 4 more coins. Open Sesame is a great source of coin generation. 5 coins immediately is a lot, the same amount as the other 5 provision profit crime, Eavesdrop. Eavesdrop does come with the extra benefit of fine-tuning your hand a little, so you'll need to trigger Open Sesame's subsequent coin generation to make it worth that 5 provision cost. If you do generate the 4 extra coins, then Open Sesame plays for a total of 9 coins, which is even better than Pickpocket, the best coin-generating crime in the game. Pickpocket also costs 1 more provision than Open Sesame, so basically, if you don't get the 4 extra coins, Open Sesame is a little inefficient, but if you do, then it's very efficient. Furthermore, I often find that it's hard to get the full 8 coins from Pickpocket without losing some value from over-profiting. Because Open Sesame splits its coin generation into 2 separate installments, the second of which only activates when you have 0 coins, Open Sesame has comparatively far less risk of over-profiting. But that's not all. Unlike Casimir and Eveline, which are limited to 1 use per turn, there is no limit on how many times you can trigger Open Sesame's counter per turn. That means that if you play Open Sesame, then use a card with a small, spammable fee to drop to 0 coins, alternating with charges from a leader ability like Lined Pockets or Off the Books, you could potentially get the extra coins from Open Sesame on the same turn you play it. That may sound gimmicky, but if you have cards like Bincy or Townsfolk on the board when you do that, you could get ridiculous tempo. You could even play Open Sesame in an early round, then get the second batch of coins in a later round for an unusual source of carryover. Just be careful about playing it near the end of the match when you may only have time to get the initial 5 coins. Finally, the Syndicate common card is Oxenfurt Guard. This is a 4 power, 2 armor, 5 provision human. Once per turn, you can pay 2 coins to boost adjacent units by 1. However, if his fee ability drops you to 0 coins, then Oxenfurt Guard boosts adjacent units by 2 instead. Oxenfurt Guard is more straightforward than the other Syndicate cards. It spends coins to boost adjacent units. Usually, it pays 2 coins to get 2 points of boost, which is the typical value that most coin-spending cards get. However, like the other Claw and Dagger cards, Oxenfurt Guard gets stronger when you drop to 0 coins, now getting 4 points of boost from 2 coins, which is very good value. Though all the other new cards also benefit when you spend all of your coins, Oxenfurt Guard only benefits when it is the card that spends your last coin, a restriction that the other cards don't have. That means that whenever possible, you'll want to use other coin spenders, including Casimir, to drop you down to 2 coins, then use the guard to spend your last 2 coins. It also means that it is fairly difficult to optimize the Oxenfurt Guard boost if you have more than one of them on the board at a time, because you need to spend down to 0 coins twice in the same turn. You'd probably need to start your turn with coins, possibly from Eveline, use the first guard to drop to 0 coins, then play a card that gives you at least 2 coins. You'll then use some other spender if necessary to get to exactly 2 coins, and use your second guard to drop to exactly 0 coins. That's probably more trouble than it's worth, so you may either want to only have one Oxenfurt Guard in your deck, or use 2 of them, just make an effort to play them in different rounds. To play the new Claw and Dagger cards together optimally, you'll probably want to start with Eveline to give you 3 coins at the end of your first turn. Then, play Casimir next to Eveline to spend all of those coins, boosting him up to 9 power, and spawning an explosives. End your turn with 0 coins, and without using the explosives to get 3 more coins from Eveline, and then to reduce the fee on the explosives to 1 coin. Now, play Oxenfurt Guard between Casimir and Eveline. Use your first coin to activate the explosives fee, giving you 2 damage and dropping your coins to 2. Now, use the guard fee to spend your last 2 coins, boosting Casimir and Eveline by 2 and spawning another explosives. Because you ended your turn with no coins, Eveline will give you another 3 coins at the end of your turn, allowing you to repeat the same combo on your next turn. As for Open Sesame, make sure you play it when you have enough spenders to finish your turn with 0 coins. That could mean a 2 fee explosives, 1 fee explosives and a guard, a 1 fee explosives and 2 guards, or some combination of Claw and Dagger and existing fee cards. Either way, it will take a little more planning. Remember that you can play Open Sesame early for coin carryover. Just make sure that whenever you do play it, you have enough time to get the extra burst of coins. Because the new Claw and Dagger cards focus a lot on coin generation and spending, something that every Syndicate archetype does, the new cards can potentially fit into almost any deck. As I mentioned previously, In Search of Forgotten Treasure and Flinder's crew can combine with Eveline to fully refill your coins from 0 to 9 every turn, opening up countless coin spending opportunities, including Kadron. In general, any card with a fee 1 ability can synergize well to make sure that you end your turn exactly on 0 coins. There are some strong fee 2 ability cards to consider, like Freak Show, but be careful not to trap yourself with 1 coin and no way to spend it. For that reason, Bare Knuckle Brawler, Bloody Good Friends, and or Witch Hunter Executioner may make for safer choices. Helvede and Eternal Fire Disciple collectively can spend exactly 3 coins per turn that you get from Eveline, then put a Lonely Champion in the same row so you don't run out of board space. You could also use Junior to single-handedly use all of Eveline's coin generation, though he may not have a low power target consistently enough for that to be reliable. You could also use additional cards to generate coins every turn, like Tax Collector, Imke, Treasure Huntress, Roderick, or big profit cards like Siggy or The Brute. Just make sure that you have enough coin spenders to use all those coins every turn. Bounty decks in particular struggle to gain momentum before they start generating coins, so combining those with Eveline and Open Sesame could make up for one of the archetype's biggest weaknesses. And of course, Bincy and Townsfolk will benefit greatly from all the coin generation. There's so much versatility here that your imagination is probably the only limiting factor. Because the Syndicate Claw and Dagger cards, particularly Eveline, can fit into almost any archetype, you could justify using some or all of them with almost any leader ability. Hidden Cash probably has the most potential, but Blood Money bounty decks and off-the-books tribute decks frequently spend all of their coins, and so can Line Pocket Crimes and Congregate Fireswarm decks with some extra planning. You could use Pirate's Cove to get a Sea Jackal whenever you desperately need a spender, but it's very likely that that would be overkill. Jackpot is the only leader ability that I'd probably rule out altogether, since it focuses the most on finishing turns with lots of coins, which is the opposite of what the new cards are trying to do. The new Scoia'tael Claw and Dagger cards will revisit the Elves archetype, giving it a new focus on maximizing the effects of its deploy abilities. Let's start with the Scoia'tael common card, Trickster. This is a 4-power, 4-provision Elf, Bandit, and Agent. When you play it, you move the most recent unit that your opponent played to the other row. You will also give that card an infusion that damages it by 1 whenever you play an Elf. At a minimum, Trickster can move your opponent's row-locked or defender units to the other row. The former will be niche but effective, maybe a way to shut down Reavers though, and the latter may give you access to a powerful card that used to be hiding behind the defender. But the big value comes from using the Trickster early, then playing lots of Elves for the rest of the round. In a full-length round, that could theoretically give you as much as 9 damage, which is incredible value for a 4-provision cost card, but that would require that your opponent play a high-power card immediately, which is unlikely. Realistically, most units have around 4 power, making Trickster play for about 8 slow points, which is still great value for such a low-cost card. Timing the Trickster will be a bit of a balancing act, as playing it early gives you more time to deal that damage by playing Elves, whereas waiting longer lowers the potential damage, but gives you more time to find a high-power unit to target. In either case, Trickster relies on having lots of other Elves, so it'll be important to fill your deck with lots of them. Next, we have the new rare Scoia'tael card, Backup Plan. This is a 5-provision tactic that damages the last unit that your opponent played by 2, then creates and plays a Bronze Elf with a deploy ability that you didn't have in your starting deck. There are 17 Bronze Elves with deploy abilities, so even if you have several of those in your starting deck, there will still be lots of options for Backup Plan to give you. But just remember, assuming that this works like most other Create cards, you will only be given 3 of the possible cards to choose from. That means that you won't be able to guarantee that Backup Plan gives you the specific card that you want every time. For that reason, you should still put all the best Bronze Elf units with deploy abilities in your starting deck, rather than relying exclusively on Backup Plan to get them. There will probably still be a few half-decent ones that you weren't able to fit in your deck, making those your preferred options for Backup Plan, a fitting name in this case. Most of the deploy abilities from those units give some form of damage, so bear that in mind when you use Backup Plan. Otherwise, take whatever unit fits the current situation best. The new Scoia'tael Epic card is an 11-provision tactic, the Heist. It has Echo, so after you use it the first time, you'll also draw into a copy of it in the next round. Heist spawns 3 copies of Cargo in an allied row. Cargo is a new doomed artifact token. Its order retriggers the deploy ability of a non-veiled, non-prepared, non-neutral soldier, agent, or bandit. Then, Cargo infuses that card with Prepared and banishes itself. Now, that's a ton of keywords, including a new one, so let's break them down. Firstly, because you can't target a neutral card, that means that you'll probably be reusing a Scoia'tael deploy ability. That ability needs to come from a unit that is a soldier, agent, or bandit, which fortunately includes a huge portion of Scoia'tael units. Notably, you can target gold units, so there are some extremely powerful targets like Vernacil, Isengrim, Zoltan Warrior, and many, many others. You can do that 3 times. And because the Heist has Echo, you can do it again in the next round. The new Prepared infusion gets added when you choose a card, and once a unit has that infusion, you can't target it with Cargo anymore. Functionally, that's a way to prevent you from choosing the same unit with all of your Cargos, but even with that restriction, this card looks absolutely busted. You could even purify the prepared status off of a unit so you can use Cargo on it again, which could be worth doing for cards with big deploy abilities. One of the only minor things holding this card back is that Cargo takes up 3 spaces on your board, which could slightly limit the value on cards like Vernacil and Isengrim. That still seems like a tiny price to pay for such a powerful effect. More likely, you'll need to resist the urge to play all of your best cards in the same round combined with Heist, so some of your Cargo targets may still end up being bronzes. The upside here is so high, it's mind-blowing. Lastly, we have the new Scoia'tael legendary card, Tellianin Ape Cullen. She's an 8 power, 13 provision elf, bandit, and agent. When you play her, she will shuffle an allied card that costs 9 or less provisions back into your deck, then play the top elf with a deploy ability from your deck. With her order ability, you can spawn and play backup plan. However, if you use a cargo on Tellianin, infusing her with prepared, she will damage a random enemy unit at the end of your turn by the number of units that have that prepared infusion. Now, there's a lot to unpack here as well, so let's start with the deploy ability. Basically, it's a way to put a unit with a strong deploy ability back into your deck so you can potentially play it later so that you can use that deploy ability again. You then replay the top elf with the deploy ability from your deck, which could potentially be the same card you just shuffled in. In total, that works very similarly to Decoy, though with a provision limit on your target and a little more certainty of what will get played from your deck. Notably, your initial target does not need to be a Scoia'tael unit or an elf, so you can still have decent flexibility there. However, if you want there to be a chance of that card you choose being the one that gets immediately replayed from your deck, then it would need to be an elf. Given the wide variety of options and the uncertainty of what you'll play from your deck, it's hard to put a point value on the deploy ability, but assuming that you don't shuffle one of your higher power cards back into your deck, it should be a net positive play. For card sequencing, that does encourage players to use units with strong deploy abilities a little early so that Tellianin has something decent to target with her deploy ability. The backup plan order ability should be worth about another 5 to 7 points, which should give Tellianin solid value overall. However, if you give her the prepared status by using cargo on her, which is a little risky because of the uncertainty of her deploy ability, but should still be a net positive play in most cases, then she should deal about 3 damage per turn, assuming that you've used all of your cargo tokens. That's good long-term value, though it may be hard to set that up early because you'll need to play Tellianin, Heist, and at least 2 more units before you maximize the damage, which may not leave you much time to benefit from that damage. And if I'm understanding the card correctly, you may be able to use the deploy ability and the order, then infuse Tellianin with prepared, giving you all 3 of her abilities. And if that's the case, then adding all of those together plus her 8-point body should make her chaotically unpredictable, but potentially very powerful. When you use the new Claw and Dagger Scoia'tael cards together, play Trickster early to give you time to build up the damage and give you an elf with the deploy ability on the board. Use backup plan to get another elf with the deploy ability, and now use Tellianin to shuffle whichever unit had a better deploy ability back into your deck and play another elf with the deploy ability from your deck. Next turn, use Tellianin's order to play another backup plan for another elf with the deploy ability, and play the Heist to spawn cargo tokens. Next turn, if Tellianin gave you a card with a strong deploy ability, use the cargo on that unit first. Then, use a cargo on Tellianin to again put the card with the best deploy ability back into your deck. Use the final cargo on whichever unit you haven't targeted yet that has the strongest deploy ability remaining. There are already tons of elves and units with strong deploy abilities, so there are lots of great existing cards to combine with the new Claw and Dagger set. Double Thunder Sentry in the melee row can give extra damage to Trickster, and Rune Mage will give extra options for backup plan. Heist and Cargo can reuse the deploy abilities on cards like Furnace Seal for wide damage or unit spawning, Zoltan Warrior for damage and unit spawning, Isengrim and Barclay for wide boosts, Dennis for tallish boosts, Teruviel for wide damage, Sheldon and Yavin for tall damage, Yorveth for traps, Kieran for lock, Gabor for resilience, and Vanadane for a ridiculous Waylay Bomb combo that's probably too clunky to ever be worth it. And then you could even use some bronzes like Dryad Vanguard, Dolbothana Archer, and Mahakam Guard. Tellianin has lots of options for cards with strong deploy abilities as well, the key difference being that targets can be neutral and don't need any specific tags, but they can't exceed 9 provisions. Cards that Tellianin can target that Cargo can't target include Ibeair for traps, Thoth for nature cards, Lady of the Lake for Oniro and the Heist, Moral for poison, Brayan for removal, Triss Butterflies for consistency, or Farseer for hand buff. Just remember that if you want a chance to replay the same card from your deck immediately, it would still need to be an elf. The most straightforward leader ability to use with the new Scoia'tael cards would be Deadeye Ambush for access to additional elves. Despite the new cards having some elf synergies, there are a lot of dwarves with strong deploy abilities, so you may be able to use some of the new Claw and Dagger cards in a Mahakam Forge deck as well. There are still some potential synergies with other leader abilities, but they would generally seem weaker and or less consistent, so they would likely be much more niche. The new Nilfgaard Claw and Dagger cards will build around adding cards to your opponent's deck. Previously, there were several clog cards that you could use to reduce your opponent's consistency, but the new cards focus less on clog itself and more on creating new types of synergies. Beginning with the rare, we have Contaminator, a 5-point, 5-provision human agent. When you play it, you can banish an enemy unit with 3 or less power. If your target wasn't a token, then you'll create a copy of it at the bottom of your opponent's deck. Firstly, let's acknowledge one of the big differences between previous cards that added things to your opponent's deck and the new cards. Previously, cards like Cynthia would put a bad card at the top of your opponent's deck, forcing them to draw into those cards in the next round. That's how the archetype got its name, from clogging your opponent's deck with enough bad cards to reduce their consistency. In this case, because you're adding a card to the bottom of your opponent's deck, clog isn't really the right word anymore, but it does still synergize with Colgrim and other cards that we'll talk about shortly. The difficult part is, your target needs to have 3 or less power, and because most cards start with at least 4 power, you'll either need to wait for your opponent to play something that small, which may just never happen, or more likely, you'll need to damage something down until it's at 3 or less power. Assuming you do that, Contaminator is a 5-point body with up to 3 points of removal for 8 points of total value. That's decent, but not great, especially given how it may at times be difficult to find something for Contaminator to target. Fortunately, it ties in well with the other new cards. The new Nilfgaard common card is Toxicologist, a 4-power, 4-provision human. When you play it, you'll infuse an enemy unit with a status that damages it by 1 anytime a card leaves or enters your opponent's deck. If the target wasn't a token, you'll also add a copy of it at the bottom of your opponent's deck. The major thing that Toxicologist does is give you a lot of damage potential on one of your opponent's units. That damage will proc whenever your opponent plays or summons something from their deck, which depending on the matchup, could happen a lot. But rather than relying on your opponent to deal that damage for you, you can make sure that the unit that you targeted takes damage by playing Toxicologist early, then adding lots of cards to your opponent's deck, including 1 damage immediately from the card that Toxicologist adds, assuming that you didn't target a token. But be careful. Although you may want to target a powerful unit so that you can get more value from the infusion, because you're making an extra copy of the card at the bottom of your opponent's deck, they may be able to tutor that out for an extra copy, giving them lots of value. Proper target selection will be the determining factor of whether Toxicologist will be a valuable plus 10-point play or a minus 10-point liability. For the new Nilfgaard epic, we have Sandor de Bacala. He's a 5-power, 10-provision human agent. When you play him, he'll shuffle a card from your deck into your opponent's deck. Whenever a card enters or leaves your opponent's deck, Sandor will get boosted by 1. Then, his order ability will spawn a drone at the bottom of your opponent's deck and set that drone's power to the difference between the number of cards in each player's deck. The deploy ability lets you take one of your worst cards from your deck and give it to your opponent, increasing your consistency and reducing theirs. Note that Sandor's deploy ability shuffles your opponent's deck, so there is a chance that your opponent will draw into that card, in addition to the risk that they tutor it out. All the more reason to make the card that you choose a weak one. Sandor will likely be one of your primary boost engines in the new clog decks, so play him early to get extra value from adding or removing cards from your opponent's deck. That will make him similar to the Viper Witcher Adept, though Sandor's boost will potentially come in more sporadic bursts. That, and Sandor can benefit from either adding or removing from your opponent's deck, making him more flexible. The odd part is the order ability, which, assuming that you've been adding or removing a lot of cards from your opponent's deck, is likely to make a powerful drone in your opponent's deck. In this case, the card does go to the bottom of their deck, but as always, there's still some risk that your opponent tutors it out. So why would you ever want to give your opponent a strong card like that? I wonder. And for your answer, look no further than the new Nilfgaard legendary card, Abduction. Abduction is a 9-provision tactic with Echo, so after playing it, you'll draw into a copy of it in the next round. It plays a unit from your opponent's deck with a provision cost of 10 or less, then boosts that card by 1 for each provision under the limit. This is the reason why you may want to add a powerful card, or at least a high-value bronze to your opponent's deck. If you did add a high provision card to their deck, then using Abduction to play that card could be quite valuable, though it won't get a big boost. Alternatively, if you played it safe by only adding small bronze units to their deck, then at least Abduction will give that card a big boost when you play it. That's why it's a big deal for Sandor to add a powerful drone to your opponent's deck. Drones cost 0 provision, so Abduction would boost it by 10, plus whatever boost you already gave it from Sandor. That could turn Abduction into a huge point slam. And once again, the big question is risk versus reward. Because that card often won't be from your starting deck, there are also some potential assimilate synergies. Abduction is also a tactic, so you could put it in tactic decks, though I don't think that the other tactic cards support Abduction enough to make it worth doing that. When playing the new Nilfgaard cards together, start with Sandor early to immediately add a card to your opponent's deck. Then, use Toxicologist and Contaminator for damage and removal, as well as boosts on Sandor when you add more cards to your opponent's deck. At or near the end of the round, use Sandor's Order ability to add a powerful drone to your opponent's deck, then use Abduction to either play that drone or a different valuable card that you added to your opponent's deck. Existing Claw cards are the most straightforward options to combine with the new Claw and Dagger cards, so consider adding Cynthia, Viper Witcher, Gorthor Gravade, and a Sire to your deck. Colgrim is typically the big win condition that those decks use, so you'll almost certainly want to use him as well. Possibly even Letho Kingslayer to create an extra copy. As mentioned previously, Viper Witcher Adept could also be a decent engine in those decks. Technically, Sandor and Toxicologist work with some mill cards like Traherne, Cantarella, Vilgefortz, Tibor, Mata, and Quax. I'm not sure if Kingslayer would count, which may be the determining factor for whether players will add the new Claw and Dagger cards to mill decks. Let's hope not, because the best way to ruin an expansion with a bunch of exciting new cards would be to prevent people from playing those exciting new cards with stuff like mill. On a more wholesome note, Abduction may give you a viable reason to use Ophiri Merchant, which is something that I never thought I would say. There isn't necessarily a specific leader ability that you have to use to enable the new Claw and Dagger cards. Tactical Decision was typically the most common for Claw decks and probably still makes the most sense because it gives you the most consistent access to Abduction. Imprisonment and Imposter are both fairly flexible, but remember not to lock a card that you use the Toxicologist infusion on. As I said before, there's some potential for Abduction in Assimilate and Tactics decks, so you could consider Double Cross and Enslave in those specific cases. Overall, I'm really excited about the new cards. They're strong, as we probably expected, but many of them involve new and unique interactions or build upon old combos in interesting ways. Which of the new cards do you think are going to be the strongest, and which ones are you the most excited to play? Let me know in the comments. This video took about 20 hours to make, so if you liked it and are interested in more Gwent content, then hit the subscribe button for more. Obviously, we don't have new expansions to analyze every day, but you can usually find me scheming up new combos in the latest seasonal events. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you next time.